Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, our code is this: to make all nerdy things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. Hi, I'm Mike, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
Hi, I'm Dan. I use he, him, his pronouns as well.
Today, we're joined by nerdcore legend MC Lars. Lars, how you doing?
That's such a nice introduction. Thank you. I use he, him, his pronouns too, and I am grateful to be here with y'all remotely.
We're so glad to have you. And we are glad to have you, but we have to start with a hard-hitting journalistic question that we always start with. What is your favorite sandwich?
I was vegan for a long time, and the pandemic has been hard. But I've tried to be vegetarian. So last night I had an incredible sourdough and Swiss cheese sandwich, which hit the spot. And it's simple, it's fast. You're in and out of the kitchen in like 3 minutes. So yeah, there's just simple food like that. That's my favorite sandwich.
Sourdough Swiss cheese sandwich. I've not heard that one before, Dan.
That is new.
That is new. We get like tons of people say Rubens like all the time.
Always.
We used to name these episodes based on the sandwiches. And then it just had to stop because every episode was like Rubens with so-and-so.
It was kind of getting sexual because Mike was like, hot, juicy Rubens. Like, all right, relax.
Well, so if I were to, my favorite sandwich would be like an avocado, sriracha, Swiss cheese on a focaccia loaf. That would be like the bomb if I had time, right?
What is a focaccia loaf?
Focaccia bread, I guess.
Focaccia. Okay, I'm saying it wrong.
And I said loaf. I wouldn't eat a whole loaf, but it's like that bread that looks like it
Why
has...
Why not, though?
Yeah, you never know. Pandemic. It has like it's kind of soft, and it looks like it's like the Swiss cheese of bread. Focaccia. Yeah.
Oh, I think I've seen that. I know what you're talking about now.
The way you make it, Mike, is you basically drench your pan in olive oil. You put the dough in, and then you drench the dough in olive oil. And then you like get your little fingers all in there and make it kind of
weird because you're making it weird.
Kind of looks like a brain. Like, I don't know, the texture
like
of
a brain,
human brain. Yeah.
I wish I could share my screen. I just Googled it, but it's the most textured of breads, and it's a winner. It's very. I think of like you have it. People often have it with olive oil. Well, I guess you said that, Daniel, but people dip it in olive oil and vinegar, and you're good to go.
Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast about bread.
Mike, it is the jam. It is a very, very good bread because it's like soft, but it's got texture.
All right. Wow. Well,
I wonder if
I'm gonna have to try this focaccia bread.
I was gonna say I could post in the chat, but you're not trying to like click on links and go on Google. We have work to do.
I appreciate the focus.
I'm gonna post it anyway.
Unmatched.
I'm just looking at pictures of focaccia bread over here, honestly.
Focaccia anyway.
I gotta wait for it now.
Sometimes you can put like little tomatoes in there and stuff.
It's dope. It's dope as pizza. Oh my gosh! Like,
oh yeah, I think I've had pizza with this type of bread. Okay, all right.
That's the bomb.
All right,
yeah. Holler.
All right, let's get back to the the interview. All right, so I'll get us back on track here. So for our listeners, I'm going to quickly list off some names: Jarrett Reddick, Parry Grip, Paul Gilbert, Wheatus, and Weird Al Yankovic. You've worked with a crazy diverse group of musicians over the years, and that list goes on. What's it like collaborating with so many different artists? Are there musical or creative lessons you've picked up from working with each different one?
Thank you, Mike. That's a great question. I mean, yeah, those are some, thinking about it, it's cool. Like, and then people in hip hop and other genres. I think the trick to getting people like, well, Weird Al's, that's a whole nother story, but like getting someone like Paul Gilbert on your record, you need to be able to have confidence in the fact that since hip hop is this postmodern art form that builds itself on being kind of this incongruous culture that connects different things in this cut and paste way, that it's gonna benefit the project to have something that might seem kind of unorthodox, right? So you always have to pitch the idea that their involvement is going to make something that benefits from being more than the sum of the parts. So having the confidence that like what they're going to add is going to make it better. So that requires having a fluency in their kind of musical DNA, and which is why I love Weird Al's ability to do this with pastiches and polkas that sum up certain eras. You have to invite them in a way that makes them realize you understand them. So it's about, it's about having the right project and having it be as done as possible before you pitch it to them, because it means you value their time. So I've learned to be professional about it, and I've learned by people who have passed or who've ended up not being on my records what not to do. And so I think, especially early in my career, I learned how to approach people. You got to also have this boundless optimism that they're going to do it, and just imagine they are. Because if you come in like, my record, so it's kind of dumb, but you got to be like total PMA and be like, this is dope. And
I love that, the PMA. I love that.
You need that. And I try not to pay people. I mean, I pay, you know what I'm saying? Like I'll pay them on the back end. Some rappers will want like a grand advance, which I think is pretty typical, but like, mostly if someone wants money just to do your record, they're not going to give it their all. You have to suggest that after they've already agreed to do it. That's something else I learned. Like people, if you give them like $500 to do a verse, they're going to phone it in if they don't know you or care about you. So you have to like think about that, because
you got to build a bit of a relationship, like a rapport with them.
Yeah. Like you two obviously have. Maybe not that good, but
we're working on it. Dan, go ahead.
Before you go to the next one, I know, Mike, I know I can speak for you on this one. Mike and I's relationship has built a lot on Weird Al. And I know he's a personal hero of yours as well. What was it like working with him?
So I'll tell the backstory real quickly. I had written a song called Download This Song 6 months before Al did Don't Download This Song, right? So Al's manager had seen an interview I did for ASCAP or something where I talked about how he was such an influence. And Al wrote me, he was like, yo, I appreciate you saying nice things in the press about me. Just so you know, on my Straight Outta Linwood record, I have a song called Don't Download This Song, and it's totally a coincidence. And I was like, wow, you messaged me. This is crazy. And then we had this pen pal friendship, and and I eventually asked him to play on my second record, and he did, but it came from the fact that he had seen something through his manager. I had credibility because he what he always said, this was like 2005 or 4 when he saw it. And he was like, you were giving me props at a time when like, it wasn't cool to publicly be down with him, because, that was after Eminem had said no on the Lose Yourself video. And he felt like, I'm talking to him, that young people in the industry, like it wasn't, he obviously had this resurgence with White Nerdy and Sense, but like there was this period between Amish Paradise and White Nerdy where I guess Running with Scissors, it was dope. The Saga Begins was dope, but his 4 iconic moments were Eat It, Smells Like Nirvana, I guess Amish Paradise, and White Nerdy. Like those were the 4, but and of course to the fans, everything he does is gold, but like I think
that's Dan and I, that's our opinion there.
Yeah, but like the average music fan would know those 4 maybe. And so I guess just to say like it was tight, that the timing, it was all about timing, like that he heard about me then. And then, I see him when I'm in LA, and he sends me his Christmas card every year, and he thanked me in Mandatory Fun because I helped produce one of his music videos for that. So shout out to him. I'm curious to hear about both of your stories and appreciation of him.
Which music video did you work on?
Lame Claim to Fame. Have you seen that one?
Oh, yeah.
So my friend
That's
Tim,
awesome.
who did my Robot Kills video, directed that, and I was on set helping produce it and helping. Yeah, I didn't direct it or anything, but I helped out on set. So I got a shout out on the album. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, For our backstory on that, I want to say it's probably watching Amish Paradise, the music video, on your like Windows 98 in your parents' basement.
Yes. Yeah. We had I think it was like a 1998 Acer Aspire computer that took 3.5 minutes to start up, and it was awful. But yeah, it eventually went into the basement when we got a newer computer, and Dan and I would sit down there watching, I think, what did we use? Like Yahoo Music back then to watch music videos?
Yep.
Yeah.
Shout out to Yahoo Music.
Yeah. And then Dan and I made like a mix CD eventually that had a bunch of Weird Al on it and a bunch of other random stuff. Like I Ran Over the Taco Bell Dog, if you remember that, like old internet song.
I missed that one, but I imagine it's amazing. I'm going to look that up. That was a golden era.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you think the Taco Bell dog is a little bit problematic?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like
in
a lot of
2021.
stuff on that CD would not play well today, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But then
maybe-
there was also like John Williams on it, like the Jaws theme in Jurassic Park and stuff like that. All
We
over
were
the place.
weird kids.
Yeah, we were.
We're weird people now, though. Like now we do parodies of like Life on Mars in this show. So nothing's really changed. You've gotten better at things. So my crazy idea is we just can run farther with them.
That's what's
So-
up. Yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
So, okay, no, sorry to interrupt, but like, that's cool that you could bond on, like, that's what's people who like Al, especially like from that era, you know, it's like one of the weird elements of like monoculture that was also subversive, but also shared by many people, but also just niche enough to feel like you're on the cutting edge of something to like him. And the fact that dude spawned a whole generation of artists, but spanned so many generations. Like no one will ever have that influence again, just due to the whole, the fact that culture's shifted so much. So that's amazing, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think-
absolutely.
Honestly, the people who have made the biggest impact in my life, every single one of them has known every word to Albuquerque by Weird Al. So like, that's a running theme in my life.
That's me.
Yeah.
You guys are so tight.
So speaking more on collaborators, you've collaborated with all those amazing artists, but you also have, speaking of being tight, right? Like you've got a tight group of people that you seem to collaborate often with, like Schaefer, the Dark Lord, and Mega Ran. When working on projects together, how do you guys create together? Is it kind of like a loose improvisational jam session where you guys just show up and just start playing off of each other? Or is it more like, do you come prepared with ideas that you kind of just start listing off and see what vibes, or how does that work for you guys?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the best albums, like I did 3 albums where 2 albums in the EP where I worked with specific artists. The first was the Digital Gangster record with YT Cracker, who's a OG nerdcore guy. And then I did the Single Famous EP with K-Flay, who's killed it in the alt rock indie world. And then Mega Ran and I did Dewey Decibel System a few years ago. But what made all those records special to me is that we actually sat down in the studio and, you know, came with some ideas, but we wrote and recorded together. I think so often with hip hop, people email stems, their verses, you know, and that's fun, but you can't make great art, I don't think, without having that fungible, tangible element of being in the studio together. So for example, with with Dewey Decibel, Mega Ran and I just emailed a lot, and I kind of took the reins on that project because that was going to be a solo record, and I was like, oh, it might be fun to include a friend who does really good literary raps, who I respect and who I could tour with and make money off that record with. So we did all the demos, and then he came to New York. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and we rented a studio for a week and just treated it like a job all day. Got there in the morning, left really late, and just recorded. But it was kind of like a jam session because Mega Ran would give me, I'd do a verse, and then he'd be like, hey, Lars, have you thought about this cadence? And Mega Ran has such a great fluency with hooks. Like he'd be like, have you tried this? And have you tried that? And I'd give him ideas. And we had people coming in doing verses. And so when a project feels a little chaotic and a little scattered, it's going to be dope, especially if you have people on the back end producing and mixing and making it sound professional. So you know that chaotic energy can be kind of cleaned up and tamed. Yeah. Because otherwise, like I found it can be fun, but it's not going to come out and it's not going to come out well. So you have to have that work, you have to have your business and production team lined up so you can enjoy it. Kind of like being a kid, just be crazy. And so having someone who can be wild with you and be very spontaneous is, that's how that works. So I work with a lot of the nerdcore rappers because, well, first of all, I think a lot of them are really tight, especially the ones I work with a lot, but that's obvious. But the reason why is because our fan bases have found each other through the algorithms of Spotify and YouTube now. And back in the day, I started to notice that with Pandora. Like I was one of the first artists to work with MC Chris after his Aqua Teen stuff blew up. And we did a track together because we met at a college show we both did. And so a lot of his fans started finding me through Pandora. And that was the cool thing about nerdcore. And it still is, like the way the algorithms introduce us to each other, which then results in things like people coming to see us more if we tour together. So
right.
The kind of the AI of constructivist learning and like the way culture is shaping right now has made this team, like the Avengers, have to come together because we all kind of want to keep doing this. But there's
you really know the audience you're talking to right now.
I think of it like that, and that might be a bit self-aggrandizing, but it's I'd rather see like the Avengers move, like the MC.
Only if you think the Avengers are all that great.
Well, okay, if you given you like the Avengers movies, I would rather watch. I don't know, an Avengers movie than like the Ed Norton Hulk.
I'd rather watch you and Weird Al and Jarrett Reddick like standing and the camera's panning around you in a circle and there's like epic Alan Silvestri score happening. I'd rather watch that personally.
yeah, that's tight. That sounds tight.
I want to touch on a point you raised in there that really hit home for me. And Dan will know what I'm talking about here. There's a band I listen to, a rock band, and I don't want to mention names because I don't want to be like that, but I've followed them for years, and I've known through discussion with fans and like studio behind the scenes interviews they do, stuff like that they're very big on this kind of like puzzle piece kind of idea of songwriting where you talked about sending stems back and forth, and they'll do that where they'll just kind of send each other ideas. But sometimes I feel like on their more recent work, it ends up, you listen to the album, but it just doesn't feel quite as cohesive as you think it should. It kind of feels like they just slapped a bunch of things together. And so I just really wanted to touch on how cool I think it is that like you made that point about how it is still important to like get together in a room with people and really like try to build something in that moment, because it just, I think it feels more organic that way,
Yeah, no, you're right, Mike. And that's been like what's so, one of the many tragic things about the COVID pandemic, because I miss being able to get in the studio with my homies. Like I've done verses for people during it, but it's not the same. And you see that with bands, you see that with groups where it does also feel like they're punching the clock. If like you're sitting in your closet and you're just going to rap a verse and then you're going to go, I don't know, the grocery store, it's different than like, okay, let's go to this one place and put everything into it. And it's just it's just kind of, it reflects how digital culture has kind of asked us to compromise our humanity for the sake of efficacy and a short-term profit, which, that's a whole nother topic. But I'm curious to hear what this band is, but I think it's kind of tight you didn't put them specifically on blast.
Yeah. I mean, one band I will mention.
That's the Wiggles. He's going through a lot right now.
Yeah. No, I mean, one band I will mention is like, I think of like the Foo Fighters when they did Sonic Highways, and how Dave Grohl talked a lot about like wanting to go to a city and spend time there and see how that influenced the music, as opposed to like you were saying, like, yeah, I guess I recorded that verse, now I'm going to go to the grocery store. And it just doesn't lock you into the process as much when you're about to leave to do something, arguably like monotonous, right? Like just doing grocery shopping.
Yeah, my best records have been with that in mind, especially my solo records. I've made them in different cities, and now being a father, it's like the luxury of doing that seems different, but I'm also open to what that chapter will bring in terms of inspiration. But I think about Rush. Like Rush recorded all their best records in different places, and they were very intentional about that. And that's interesting about Dave Grohl, because that's someone who was forced to be flexible just by virtue of being involved in so many projects, and his asset being an adaptive, everyone says how he's one of the nicest guys in the music industry, being an adaptive, positive person who was able to just roll with the flavor, as Wesley Willis would say,
Yeah.
So that's a cool reference.
Yeah, no. Well, so speaking of like rock, I'm thinking like other genres, you don't seem to really have any boundaries in terms of genre. Like I've heard you kind of all over the place. How do you manage to pivot that easily? Do you listen to a large variety of music when you're not writing or while you're writing? Is that something you do while you're writing to get inspiration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda and quoted Weird Al saying that, no, his Weird Al quoted him saying like, the reason why parody works so well is that it becomes the clothes of genre that a song wears, right? So a good song is a good song. So like whether you're wearing a jacket or a hat, how you accessorize that song reflects all the cultural and stylistic things that define, the broader picture. So I always think that like context is important. I grew up listening to a lot of music. I think a lot of people in our generation did. I think that Napster ultimately was a big influence on that and how culture shifted. But I grew up, loving hip hop music, loving like West Coast punk rock and thrash music, and loving funny music and strange music. And so all those things kind of morphed together. Oh, and loving jazz, loving how jazz could kind of teach me about music theory. So yeah, those are my touchstones, right? And I think it's fun to bring what we were saying earlier about how hip hop is a subgenre that allows you to reference and connect with other things. If you fail to do that and every track sounds the same, has the same 808 and synth line, like some people can do it. Some people can have the same aesthetic and it sounds dope, but it can also be boring. And I'm diagnosed with ADD, so I have to always surprise myself. Otherwise I'm bored. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel that. I mean, it's this whole interview is already been so interesting for me because Dan could tell you hip hop and rap, they are so out of my wheelhouse. And I've never written anything in that way. And so leading to the next question, I cannot imagine trying to fit so many words into a song as a lot of hip hop artists like yourself do, because it's so out of my wheelhouse. And like when I sing, my style of singing happens to be pretty like legato, like a lot of drawn out notes. So I usually don't have to write a lot of words to get through a song. But what advice would you have for like young budding lyricists who want to try to stay fresh and creative and, increase their vocabulary?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I mean, I think funnily enough, I realized I could rap when, this is so nerdy. My choir in high school did a medley of Rent songs. And there's a song called La Vie
Dude,
Bohème.
Me too.
Okay, on La Vie Bohème, there's that part. It's like a rap breakdown. He's like, adventure, TDM, no family, boring locations, darkroom, perfect faces, egos, money, Hollywood, and sleaze. They're talking about like everything that, and I had a solo where I got to go up and just like spit that. And I worked so hard to learn that I could even do it 20 years later. But you know what that is? It's breath control. It's just
right. And
I was on the swim team and I still, I'm training to run a marathon now. And so like, I really take physical fitness seriously. And so therefore if you can figure out where to breathe and you have strong breath control, anyone can rap. And in a way it's easier than singing because, well, some singers might disagree, but like it's, if you have a sense of rhythm and a sense of timing, and you can breathe and you can work. It's a lot of practice. Like I remember I practiced that 100 times. And when I learned it, I was like, oh, I can do this. I mean, so my advice would be to find, if you're trying to rap, I guess Hamilton is a great modern example. Like find one of the simpler songs from that. Not that any of them are simple, but some are easier than others. And just practice one 8-bar phrase over and over and over and over and over again. And it's muscle memory. And then you find that, and with writing rap, so I do these workshops where people hire me as a consultant to help them produce and market their albums. And a lot of it's hip hop, but some of it's other genres. But what I talk to them a lot is about learning where not to speak, where to have silences. And we always look at Miles Davis, especially the Kind of Blue record, as a touchstone for that.
Yes.
Learning where he doesn't play is just as interesting as where he plays, right? And all the other artists on that record, all the guests, it's such a crazy lineup. So learning where not to rap, learning where to be silent, and that's where you breathe. And I think that's kind of interestingly enough, it's something that we can apply in a more bird's eye view about how to live our lives. Learning when to talk and learning when not to, learning when to listen. And I think all that stuff just comes together. And one day you'll be like, oh, I actually can rap. And when you're your authentic self, that's the magic alchemy of it, you know? And I think that it takes a while, but nothing's going to come quickly. And I hate to be like a old man millennial, but like you're going to, you want to put out your first song and get 1 million plays on YouTube, but you're going to be putting out 100 songs until you get a song that people are stoked about. So just take the craft seriously and be patient. So that's kind of a very long answer, but I think that's how I think people should approach anything, rapping or anything that's technically complicated.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic answer. If it had to be long, it had to be long. It works. I like that you mentioned like Hamilton and Lin-Manuel Miranda in there, because you were talking about when you first realized you could rap. I think one of the only recent things I can think of that I was like, yeah, or at least at some point I could rap it. I may have forgotten how to by now, but the rap that Dwayne Johnson does in Moana.
Oh yeah,
in the middle of You're Welcome. Like there was a point, I think I could maybe still do it, but there was a point where I could do that whole thing, and I was like, "Oh, I can actually do that." Like,
so you're a rapper.
So
yeah,
I get. Thank you. I guess.
That's a really good example, dude. That's like something that'd be a great entry point, because the interesting thing now is how rap, it was looked down on, especially in the back of the day. Everyone saw it as a fad, but now it's proven its longevity, and it inserts itself in a way where like that rap is pretty technical and pretty dope, and like. But it's a good, if you could do that, you could do who's dope. I mean, someone like Machine Gun Kelly, he chops when he's not doing pop punk, which is the Tech 9 chop style, where you're just quick breath, quick off tempo, right? And so it's anything like pop culture is a great entry point for hip hop, because the skill level has been raised so high. So
this is like a lot of new information to me, and I'm loving taking it in. This is great. So, all right. So I want to shift a little bit with these questions, but what is your favorite fan interaction you've ever had?
Oh, like a fan of mine meeting? Or
just like a good ceiling fan from Home Depot or Lowe's, but preferably Lowe's, but
no, okay, yeah, I'm sure that's a great question. I'm always stoked when like this happened a few times when I meet like a young kid who has done a very fun draw like fan art like of my cartoon character or something, and they're kind of shy about it. And when you show them how much you appreciate it, how their face kind of lights up. Like kids really. They still, it's like believing in Santa Claus. Like we don't have to get into that, but like concerts are still magic to them. And to see that light and joy in their eyes, and to like have them manifest, this is something I gave you. I'm thinking specifically in Columbus last tour, 2 siblings or cousins brought Schaefer and I this really, really amazing art they drew of us. And that meant a lot. So yeah, because when I was a kid, I would draw my favorite artists and stuff and think about how I would feel if I gave it to them one day. And we really pride ourselves on being so accessible and like open and at merch the whole time. So it just means a lot when, like I'll say that experience in Columbus last tour. Shout out to those amazing artists, these young kids who drew for us. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. That's just great. I love hearing stories like that. So, hey, we've gone over this like extensive list of people you've worked with, but who's a dream collaborator that you haven't yet worked with?
Well, my 3 favorite rappers of all time are KRS-One, Violent J from ICP, and E40. And I've worked with KRS-One. So I played together in the Juggalos a few years ago with Mega Ran, and we met Jay and Shaggy, and I'd love to work with them if it ever if ever were like something that made sense. But I'd also love to work with E40 because I grew up in the Bay Area, and he really defines that whole style of being unorthodox, being wild. He has amazing breath control, his performance, his everything, his spirituality. I'd love to work with either E40 or ICP. That would be dope. And I feel like one day I will. I'll put it out there. Why not? I'll make it happen.
That's so awesome.
All right, here I come.
Yeah.
'Cause that leads into something I wanted to talk about. Hatchet Chat, which you've been doing for a bit. For those who don't know, it's a series about Insane Clown Posse and the label and everything they've put out. What do you think makes ICP unique as musicians?
Wow, these freaking questions, y'all. This is like one of the best podcasts I've done in a while. So I could go on and on. I mean, we every few weeks we drop an hour-long analysis of one of their albums. My shout out to MC Snacks, who's my homie in Canada, who produces the series. What I love about ICP is three things. The first is their imagination, and the fact that like they took this whole world in the way that C.S. Lewis made Narnia a metaphor for his belief in his spiritual belief. ICP made this thing called the Dark Carnival, which is this metonymy for how we find salvation in this fragmented, postmodern, messed up digital culture, and how we find redemption through it. So they took something like very cerebral and made it very accessible through their imagination and through their creativity. The second thing I love about them is how they were able to independently build their audience and build their business based on just being true to themselves. And the third thing that's so impressive to me about them is how since the late 80s and early 90s, they've really been committed to this joke of being two insane, like murderous clowns, bringing vigilante justice and not necessarily caring about being the most mainstream rappers and just being unapologetic about it. So those three things, their imagination, their business sense, and the way they stuck to the joke makes them amazing. And the fact that their music is so always changing and it's just, there's so much of it. There's a lot, they've done some stuff that, I like more than other stuff, but yeah, those guys, honestly, if you want to talk about inspirations, I really started rapping because I had this vision of, when I was young, I'd draw a picture of myself like as an alien, and I thought about how it would be so tight to be on Psychopathic Records as a rapper whose backstory was like I was a space robot who rapped about crazy stuff. And so I was going to call myself Android because my real name's Andrew, and I had this whole backstory. So I was like, that was one of my when I was 16, I went to see them with my friends, and the show was so tight, and they changed my life, man. And then when I've opened for them twice now and getting to share that story, getting like a great reaction from the Juggalos, because that community is so loyal and they've embraced me and my homies. And everyone's different with their beliefs. I'm not trying to push anything, but as a Christian, the ICP, like I grew up as a Christian, and ICP had this weird twist on the Six Jokers card where they revealed that the whole thing is this metaphor for the Christian allegory, and that they're just trying to spread the awareness of God in this world that is a little lost. And that surprised a lot of people. And I think people know that about them, but it's not really like the center of their story necessarily in the press. But to me, as a man of faith, that's tight as heck. Like that helped me understand some things in something. I feel like the Dark Carnival is real in the context of what it represents. So did that answer your question? That was a long answer.
I specifically asked this because I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Juggalo community, because I don't listen to their music. Like I've listened to pretty much all of their albums, but it's not like my flavor. But the Juggalo community itself is something that has highly interested me since, I'll tell you that story offline, but what do you think? Why do you think the Juggalo community is such a tight-knit group of people who consider themselves outcasts?
Yeah, man. I mean, socioeconomically, they were the first group to achieve any sort of platinum status, to rep kind of the, if we look at the history of the Midwest, post-World War II, Japan and Germany's auto industries were decimated, right? Having lost the Second World War. So Detroit had this huge upswing in production and economic revitalization with all the auto manufacturing. Then when Germany and Japan got their economies back together, Detroit suffered. And there was this whole economic downturn in Detroit, which led to this later cultural renaissance with people like Eminem and the underground. And so ICP spoke for this legion of people. And I'm going to say like largely, their fans are diverse, but like originally largely, I would say working class white people from the Midwest who didn't have a group that spoke specifically to them and took elements of hip hop culture and reggae reggae influences and other things that they could relate to and threw them all together. So they spoke for a group of people who didn't have a band that spoke for them. And they did it in a way that was original. And they did it at a time in history where that generation, the kids of the people whose parents had felt the fallout of the economic changes post World War II, they didn't have a band like that just because of history. So I think that's who they spoke for,
Dan, I just want to pause for a second, acknowledge the fact that you just asked a question about the Juggalo community. And then it was like, well, in post World War II America, like that was awesome.
Thank you, Mike.
I got a whole history overview. Like, oh man, that was great. Dan's brother Jake, one of our other hosts, is a huge history guy. So I think he'll probably love that little section right there.
Well, and Mike, to extrapolate upon that, it's because obviously that's why they're so close, because there was no group like that had this, MTV, their label that bought them out of their contract when Disney dropped them for political reasons or whatever. The label paid $1 million for MTV to show a documentary about them. And suddenly they became this mainstream phenomenon. And so therefore that moment was a really special moment, looking at all the historical factors and then looking at how that group of people was so tight-knit because they rode for what ICP are proud to call the most hated band of all time. And so it was like this interesting example of subculture before social media and something that survived on the backs of that. And then fast forward to 2009 when SNL did the whole spoof about their magnets debacle from the Miracles video. They had this whole status then of all the Vice magazine and all the ironic hipster news journalists got behind them, and the magnets thing became a punchline. And as an aside, Shaggy didn't write that line. Jay wrote that line, but Shaggy rapped it. So everyone joked about how, Shaggy doesn't have a PhD in electromagnetic technology. Oh, Shaggy must be dumb. It became this punchline for this is the working class, uneducated America that is like everything wrong with the country. But guess what? They fought against racism. They had a song, an anti-Confederate flag song on Carnival Carnage. They fight for justice. There's a lot of good things they do in it. So I love how the heels, if we use a wrestling term, became the heroes.
There we go.
And that they were on the right side of history the whole freaking time. And so it's a great story. I mean, it's the best story.
As an unabashed fan of Creed, I can totally relate to being loyal to a band that everyone hates. So
that's funny.
But I do think it's so interesting. Like, even at their shows, they have canned food drives and things like that. Something that I've always found interesting is the whole Faygo thing. And it didn't click with me until recently. I was like, why do they drink this Faygo stuff? And because it's cheap. It's something they had access to. I don't want to get too far into the Juggalo thing because I will talk to you for hours about it because I think it's I told Mike before the interview, I was like, this is one of the best subcultures in the country. They are something that have been so tight-knit and care so much about each other that it's always such an interesting thing to read into and meet people who are into it. Yeah,
and the Faygo thing, it's that's just because repping who you are, repping the pop they grew up drinking. And they're not just a joke. It's, I've always been drawn to people who are funny without being a joke. Weird Al's an example of this. If you can be funny, but then have something to say, you've got my attention. And they did that. And it's going to be interesting what happens when the guys get older and like, God forbid one of them ever passes, like what's going to happen to the culture, to the subculture. And it's like the Grateful Dead, right? Like I would say they're the closest thing our generation has to the Grateful Dead. Jay-Z says he's rapped Grateful Dead, but the Juggalos are the 90s version of the Deadheads for sure. And
that's a great way to put that.
They're a really great subculture, and I'm really grateful that they've kind of embraced how I've brought this academic love to them. And I know it could be my wife in our wedding vows. She said, I'll listen to you talk about anything ICP for up to 15 minutes at a time to show you I love you. So shout out to Ashley.
That's the real deal, man.
I do want to jump off with that academic thing, because the first album of the first EP of yours that like if it was a CD I would have burned through it. The Edgar Allan Poe EP was so inspirational because like growing up I was big into poetry and like that wasn't cool. Like people weren't into that. So like having something where I can be like, no, listen, this stuff is really cool. What drew you to Poe rather than like doing an album about Frost or something along those lines?
That is a great question. I mean, Poe, it all started with one of my first rap songs on the Laptop EP. It was based on the pun of the Raven, who's that rapping at my chamber door? I was like, oh, I could rap this because the trochaic octameter is essentially the same cadence of most rap, right? You have trochaic octameter or iambic tetrameter. Rap is based on one of those two forms. But Poe, I always loved spooky stories as a kid. I don't know if y'all know ICP, one of their first songs, Old Evil Eye, is based on the Telltale Heart. So like I was intrigued that ICP were rapping about Poe. And I also loved how Poe believed in the magic of sound. Like Dan, I'm sure you feel me on this. Like the if you spend enough time finding the right words with the right rhymes and sound, he believed in the sonorous ability of words to transcend time. And people would laugh at him, like Whitman and Emerson. They'd say, oh, you're just a jingle man. You just write songs for kids and spooky stories about birds. Like, you're not a real writer. And he was like, no, my poems are going to be remembered because I really care about the musicality of it. So if you're making a concept record whose thesis is to prove that rap is poetry, which now is a very like obvious thing. And when I first started rapping that first Raven song in 2003, people were slowly beginning to realize that. And I think Poe's work reflects that. And I think something interesting about how hip hop serves a place in society. It kind of, Chuck D called it the Black CNN, meaning that it is a place where people can say things you didn't hear in the mainstream. And I think something interesting about Poe is how, especially in his later works, he deals with the theme of what happens when manifest destiny has a dark side. What happens when you take over the whole country and European people colonize the whole country? One of his poems, El Dorado, is kind of what I'm talking about. What happens when you look for gold and you look for, your dream to come true at the expense of other people? What happens when manifest destiny and the gold rush has a dark side? And I think he was really prescient in a way hip hop is, in that the dark story of what happens when the American dream goes wrong is a central theme of anti-transcendentalism. And that was something that Whitman and Thoreau and Emerson weren't trying to talk about, but you see that in Melville, you see that in Poe. And so, I have this whole joyful, happy persona, but I don't know. I think if you throw a little darkness and realness in there, you get people's attention. So Poe is just someone who is timeless in a way that similarly hip hop's agency in the 21st century American culture is. So I thought that EP would be a good proof of concept for that. So I appreciate you saying that, man, because that's one of my most proud things. I would say that's one of my favorite projects, and I'm going to do a follow-up when I have a minute of like a part 2. So that's a special news drop I'm giving y'all right now.
that would be I got a lot of words inside of me. They're really hard to get out. But as you said, other people were telling him that he wouldn't matter later on. And for a while I lived in, growing up after like a certain age, I lived in Maryland. And every year they would do the birthday part. Like someone would go to his grave and leave something on his gravestone and drink cognac. But the guy stopped coming, so they started having a party, like the Edgar Allan Poe Society. And I think they stopped because the last time I went, like, they were having money problems. But standing in a graveyard with a bunch of other poetry nerds and seeing this society read his poetry at his grave was maybe the most emo thing that I've ever done in my entire life. But I think it was one of the most emotional moments in my life, seeing people feel the same way I do about something. So stuff like this is things I connect with, so I'm very, very excited to hear it's coming around again.
Yeah, man, and Poe was like talking about the culture that he's created. I mean, the Juggalos are, Poe was a 19th century Juggalo. He spoke for the disenfranchised. He took these stories of heartbreak and loss and created this whole imaginary world. He was very focused on consistency, imagery, storytelling. He really respected the craft, but he was totally dissed by all his contemporaries, and he's proven his longevity. And so I think that like that story you told about them in the graveyard reading poems and like celebrating his death feels like the gathering of the Juggalos.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it really is. And I know you mentioned it earlier, but I really wanted to talk about the Dewey Decimal System. Have you always been an avid reader, like through your life?
Yeah, my mom was a librarian, is a librarian, and I was kind of, I guess a lot of the kids of our generation, like we were kind of encouraged to play alone. I think more than like the generation that came after us, the Gen Z kids. I think there's kind of maybe more helicopter parenting. I don't know, but I think there was a lot of like being alone time, and so I always loved reading, and I started reading at a young age, and books, middle school was particularly hard because I think as many people can relate, I was picked on. I was not good at sports. My family moved to a new school and it just sucked, man. And I was tall and gangly and it sucked. But books were an escape. And so yeah, and I had a book of Poe stories that I loved that I started reading when I was like 10, which I might be a little young for Poe, but it stuck with me, and but so I wanted to, Dewey Decimal. I had that idea for an album of that title for years, and Mega Ran was down to do it. And I'm proud of that record. I feel like that's my last super dope record I've done in a while. I mean, that I'm proud of. I'm not trying to denigrate other stuff I've done, but I think that's my favorite record I've done in the last 10 years, to be candid.
I loved it, and as someone who read Great Expectations and War of the Worlds like at a very young age, I get it. So do you think that putting these things into music, like, is there anything that you try to write into your lyrics when you're talking about lit to try to capture someone to actually read these books?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And there's also all this weight now where like we realize that all the writers we wrote about on Dewey Decimal were male, I think, and all of them except one were white. And so when you're celebrating the canon of literature, what is your responsibility? I ask myself as a white person, doing that through a black medium and being thoughtful about that. I think the way you do it is by not making it a parody and making sure the songs, even if they were about something else, like partying or something, a mainstream theme, like a dance move, like that, if it sounded good, even not being a song about for example, George Orwell, right? It has to exist. Well, it can't just be a gimmick. I think one of the issues with nerdcore is that so much of it trades on the fact that there's a built-in fandom for whatever you're rapping about, that people don't try to make actually musical banging songs. And that's a broad generalization, but I think if you can make a song fun, and I really like the idea of juxtaposition. Like if you take a story that's really sad and make it really funny, that's a way for people to want to learn more about that. Like what's an example of that on Dewey Decimal? I mean, 1984. Well, no, that's a sad song about something sad. Okay, here's an example. The Watchmen, our song about The Watchmen is kind of a fun, happy, old school song about a book, a graphic novel that's notoriously dark and kind of the origin of the anti-hero in graphic novel literature, one of them at least. So it's like, you got to make sure that how you tell it is just as important as the story you're writing about. And you have to make sure you don't do like a fact dump. You have to get into the head of the characters and make it fun and human and fresh and make it so they can't get the chorus out of their heads. Because otherwise, people, you want people to like the song even if they don't care about books. Because if you can't do that, you shouldn't be. You just write an essay about the book. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Huh. The last part I didn't really think of it that way. The Watchmen one has gotten stuck in my head. I literally can. The hook, the dun dun, is always in my head.
Thanks, man.
So since you started doing this, do you think the outlook on nerds and geeks just in general has changed? Like in culture?
Well, yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think about that, and I know being political is too boring, but I think about like the 2016 election, how the idea of how certain memes were co-opted for certain political aims made it so these people, the whole idea of these people behind keyboards, the libertarian element became kind of scary, the power you could wield. When before, being a nerd it went from being kind of like you were dissed by society, then it was clear that you were able to do things for society and you were heroes, to then becoming potentially villains and all these stories about like what's sick about our society manifesting in people's action. I think now being a nerd is just being someone who's either passionate about popular culture or fluent with certain technology. It's really changed. And I think along those lines, it used to be an interesting story like, oh, it's a nerd who raps. That's crazy. Let me listen to this guy. And now everyone is a freaking nerd who raps. So, you know what I mean? It's like nerd culture. To be a nerd is just to be someone living in the 21st century. Everyone's a gamer. Everyone has a Candy Crush or some sort of like game on their phone. Like, that might be a weird example, but everyone can name an Avenger. So it's not special to be a nerd anymore. And it's actually like, if someone's a nerd, I'm kind of like, all right, well, tell me about what you like. I don't care about, I'd rather have a conversation about their interests. You know what I mean? Because that delineation is, I think it's changed so much in the 20 years I've been doing this. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's become less of a label and like less of a label in someone's identity and more of like, oh, like, what are you into? Rather than if you're a nerd, you automatically play Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, no, like there is room for like kind of diversity under that kind of flag. It's just like, there's like, you can be into different things. So actually getting to know the person and understand what they're into is like a huge part of that now. And I think the world is a little bit more willing to do that. Would you say so?
Yeah. And I would also think that I would also say that it's gone so far as like the nerd culture has been so co-opted, kind of like quote unquote wokeness has become something that corporations try to show that they're down with, which is, that's a whole nother conversation. Like being down with nerd culture, that's like the whole thing. Here's a good example with the Wall Street Bet subreddit and the GameStop thing. It's like, it's like there's so much money tied up in nerd branding now, billions of dollars. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's algorithms based on that exist to decipher what our history is and what specific type of nerds we are, so we can spend more money on that brand. And that no one, I think, expected. And that is cool. But it's also this whole constructivist learning AI thing that if you look at developmental psychology puts us in these silos of like, if I'm an ICP fan, my algorithms are going to be showing me ICP records and they're not going to be showing me other stuff. And so I'd rather that's what's so fun about touring. You can talk about this stuff versus being online bombarded in a way that is kind of gross sometimes, but inevitable. And everyone's got to make money, and like nerds who make money off of their art, like that's so dope. I'm all for that,
So a part of that, when you're writing and creating all these things, what do you think is important to you to make a connection with your audience?
Oh boy, that's something I think about a lot now. And during COVID, it's been interesting because I've had a lot of time, but I've not really put out a lot of music outside of my Patreon, which is a different kind of approach that differently. I think I mentioned this earlier, like you always have to approach songwriting like a paper. Your thesis has to be interesting, meaning that becomes your hook. Why am I writing the song and why am I the person to write this? I have to like think about if I'm going to write a song about, for example, well, I did a song about episode 4, right, for my Patreon. And I wrote it from the perspective of Owen Lars, not just because I like his name, but because he, his story is he doesn't want, spoiler alert, he doesn't want Luke Skywalker to become a Jedi because he's aware of what happened.
I was planning on getting around to watching that still. I know it's been like 40 years, but...
Yeah, episode 4. So I think it's a good place to start. He doesn't want Luke to end up like his stepbrother, right? Who obviously had some missteps. So I wrote the song from the perspective of Owen Lars trying to be protecting Luke, telling him you should just be happy. You're a moisture farmer. I don't want to hear about your Jedi ambitions. Like, we have work to do. It's already sunrise. Both suns are in the sky. Let's get to work, right? And I wrote that perspective as a father talking to my son, like thinking about, man, I don't know if I would want you to be a rapper and go out and tour and be doing the stuff I did because it's kind of risky and dangerous. And so I have to put some of myself into the story if I'm using pop culture as a trope, because there's nothing worse than these Wikipedia raps where you're just listing all the facts about a character. People are going to listen to that and people are going to pay you for that. And people are going to want to hear that song it shows, those songs it shows, but there's no personal element in that. And I think that's very important. Every artist needs to think, why am I writing this song? And why am I the person to write about this now? And when our where speed and acceleration is the thing that defines our culture more than the fact that the culture is accelerating. The culture is acceleration. So we have to constantly put out stuff. It's so easy to lose track of that. And I think artists from my generation are less prolific because it's like they want to have meaning in everything and they want to tell their own story. I like writing these lit hop songs because I'm able to tell my story through another character. And how do I do that? I really have to think about how I relate to this or that character. And that's why I love Kerouac, because I'm definitely not trying to compare myself to him because, but he was so awesome the way I think the literary term is roman à clef, is when you take, you change the names of the characters so you can tell an autobiographical story. And therefore you absolve yourself of having to be completely factually accurate. Like on the road, all the characters' names are changed. And that's why it's interesting, because he plays with the narrative. And Stephen King talks about, you got to find the truth in the lie. That's what fiction is. You find the truth in telling a made up story. And I try to do that with all of my songs. So yeah, that's how I approach it. So that's why I've been not putting out a lot of stuff now, because I'm definitely thinking about this stuff more and more every day.
I think it's good to have that filter though. As opposed to just putting out like everything. And then it's like, does that, just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's one album a year is an okay output. And I think that's like, if you're doing a song every 2 weeks, you're going to have 26 songs and pick your best 10. And there you go. Like, you just got to be disciplined about it, Yeah,
absolutely.
And now that you mentioned earlier that you do teach people and do like seminars and stuff like that, how is it for you to teach someone your craft? How does it feel?
It makes me think about the process more, which is why this podcast has really been interesting talking to both of you, because these are things I haven't been able to verbalize a lot of my process until I've started working with. I have 5 students now who I meet regularly every 2 weeks. I meet privately with each of them. And I really enjoy it because I think that there are concrete things about the craft which you can actually pass on. I'm actually doing a master's right now in instructional science and technology through Cal State University, Monterey Bay. And so my thesis is I'm working with a rural school in Northern California on actually how to construct their own podcast, which is going to become like their yearbook. And so a lot of the things I'm learning and working on that project with these kids relate to how I do my lit hop courses. And so it's really fun because, like there's a theme in education about spiraling. You always want to try to spread out and try to make sure what you do builds on itself, scaffolding. And that's really, really fun to see what my students do because they impress me and I learn a lot from them. And it's fun.
Good use of the word scaffolding. Like nice psych term.
Thank you.
So To wrap off our questions, we have another hard one for you. If you had a Rube Goldberg machine, what would it do?
My Rube Goldberg machine. So can I describe the pieces of it?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. I'll reverse engineer it for you. So the final,
this is great.
The final product is an anonymous person listening to a finished album, start to finish, so that I made. So most of the work, I think, of independent artists now, and Mike, as a musician, I'm sure you feel me on this, is like thinking about how you're going to get your project heard. And that can be so daunting and stultifying, and that can suck all the joy from the jump before you even start. So I'd want to have my Rube Goldberg machine know where all my advertising dollars are going, know what platforms people are going to want music marketed to them on, whether it's TikTok this week or Instagram Reels or whatever. Like, have all that set, so it's all, whether you hire a publicist or whatever, all the business, you press a button and so it sends emails to the right people at the right time. It automatically launches the Kickstarter, so you're not spending your life savings to try to pay Facebook. Right.
Take it a step further. Have it like introduce some kind of AI that knows what the right time in their life is to hear your album, so that it's the most impactful it can possibly be.
Yeah, right. Right time of the day they get the email, or like if they have to wait till they're 15 to hear about it, right?
Yeah,
all your fans.
If I can give you parts and pay you for labor, can you make 2 of these?
No, yeah, we can patent it. I think this could be a big hit. Everything, and like you have a bird that flies across the room and drops off the tax form, so you can deduct the right things for your LLC. You know what I mean? And it's already filled out. And then that bird also pays the accountant. So what you have is from the jump, your project is going to get the best promotional effort possible. So the part that's not part of the Rube Goldberg machine is the part of you in a room where you're spending the time making the actual art and putting your heart into it and not tripping on this stuff. So when you're done, you press a button, and that button, also the part of the Rube Goldberg machine would be the uploading the files to TuneCore or DistroKid or whatever, and sending the email, marketing it to your friends in a non-annoying way, and knowing who you shouldn't text, because it's nothing worse than getting a text from someone about their new video that you don't really talk too much, because so knowing knowing all your friendships as well as their age, right? Like, you want that, be able to take the human the elephant in the room is to make the human element the central part of the Rube Goldberg machine. And guess what? You need to upgrade it every 10 minutes, probably. You have to rebuild it.
Right.
That's my machine.
Listen, I totally feel you were right to say at the beginning that like I'd feel you on it, because like being an independent musician, like I work a full-time job. It's not my gig to be a musician, but I held off on really putting out a complete work of music. It was a 5-track EP that I finally put out a couple of years ago. For so long, I held off on doing anything like that for that very reason, that there's that little voice in your head that just goes like, yeah, but does anyone care who's going to listen to it? Like, what's the point? And, once I did it, I was glad, but that really is a obstacle to get over for sure.
Good work, Mike. I mean, that takes courage. And I feel like part of my Lit Hop course is I try to get into everyone's head and psychoanalyze what is stopping them, because all these people, they have to apply to my school. You have to send me like an application, and I request 5 demos and this and that. Okay. So I don't take on people who I don't think have the potential, but I do feel like everyone has something that stops them. So what is that? There's got to be this. You go in there like I'm trying to think about Mario in the original Mario game with the hammer. Break up those blocks, the writer's blocks, and you could be like Mike and put out that 5-song EP and not worry about it.
You're talking Mario. You're speaking my language, so it's working.
And here's the other thing about Mario: you can't go backwards with that stuff, right? It's Mario 1. I mean, the Mario 2. I guess.
No,
3.
But you're going deep with it's great. I love it.
Thank you all I feel like I'm looking at my waveform in Logic. I've been talking for the majority of this.
Listen, I wanted to say this sometime earlier, and I didn't want to interrupt you at any point, but I have enjoyed this so much just because you've been so fearless about just like getting so deep into the craft of everything and the technical aspects of things. And I just think that's so interesting because, some people can be a little like, they don't want to speak too much on their craft because they're afraid of, like they want to retain their value, right? Like they don't want to like have their ideas or their methods stolen from them or something. So they hold back. But just the fact that you were so open and willing to like touch on so many different points this was just such a blast to listen to.
Thanks, man. You both have really good questions, and I appreciate you respecting me enough to like ask thoughtful questions. And it's cool. I was checking out your podcast. Y'all, your reviews and everything is amazing for like the time you've been doing this and the reaction you've been getting. Like, good work. I'm impressed.
Thank you.
You're doing it great.
That means a lot.
Yeah, genuinely, thank you. That is. I like. Yeah. Oh man.
So, Lars, where can people find you, and what's your Patreon?
Thanks, Dan. MCLars.com is the portal for everything. Patreon.com/MCLars. I'm putting out 2 Star Wars songs a month. I'm doing a series called Lars Wars, where I'm doing a rap song about everything in the Star Wars universe. Right now, I'm about to do Empire Strikes Back, and then I'm doing Ewoks Caravan of Courage. So it's completely chronological, and I'm going through to the Lego Star Wars special. I just dropped a song about the original holiday special, and then I'm going to end with the Lego holiday special. And I started with, how far back did I go? I went back to the beginning. So check that out, because you can't hear that anywhere else but on the Patreon.
You can find us at gatecrashers.fan and on all of our social medias at gatecrasherspod. Catch you next week.
Gatecrashers.